She said I do. Then the groom played the video. The wedding the world envied. Everyone thought this was a perfect wedding. Until the groom grabbed the microphone and said, "Before I say my vows, I need you all to watch this." What played next destroyed a family, exposed a crime, and turned a fairy tale into a nightmare. And what the video revealed was only the beginning. The bells. The bells of Hollowcrest Cathedral rang with a slow, deliberate authority, the kind that made people pause mid-step, mid-sentence, mid-thought. They had rung for monarchs. They had rung for funerals. They had rung for history. Today, they rang for Lydia Ashbourne. Outside the cathedral, the air buzzed with quiet excitement. Luxury black sedans lined the stone driveway in flawless formation, their engines humming softly before being shut off one by one. Chauffeurs opened doors in synchronized precision. Guests stepped out dressed in tailored suits, silk gowns, and jewelry that caught the sunlight just enough to announce status without saying a word. This was not a wedding people stumbled upon. This was a wedding people measured their lives against. Inside the cathedral, centuries-old stone pillars stretched upward, disappearing into vaulted shadows. Sunlight filtered through massive stained glass windows, casting fractured colors across the marble floor. Blues, reds, golds, like fragments of something already broken. White roses lined the aisle. Hundreds of them, imported overnight. Inspected personally. Everything about this place whispered the same word. Perfect. At the altar stood Julian Cross. He didn't shift his weight. He didn't adjust his jacket. He didn't look around. Tall and broad-shouldered, Julian stood with military stillness, his black tuxedo tailored so precisely it looked sculpted rather than sewn. His dark brown hair was neatly styled, his jawline sharp, his lips pressed into a neutral line that revealed nothing. To the guests, he looked calm. To anyone who truly knew him, he looked resolved. Julian was not waiting for a bride. He was waiting for a moment. The doors opened. When the cathedral doors finally opened, the room rose to its feet in unison. Conversation died instantly. Lydia Ashbourne stepped inside. She moved like someone who had never doubted the world would make space for her. At 27, Lydia was the kind of woman people described using the word effortless, even though nothing about her life had ever been left to chance. She was tall and slender, her posture flawless. Her porcelain skin glowed beneath soft, expertly applied makeup. Her hazel eyes shimmered with confidence, not nerves. Her chestnut brown hair was styled in an elegant bridal updo, smooth and glossy, with a few deliberate strands framing her face just enough to soften her sharp beauty. Her ivory silk gown hugged her figure perfectly, lace detailing catching the light with every step. The long veil trailing behind her looked less like fabric and more like a declaration. She smiled. Not the smile of a woman hoping things would go right, but the smile of a woman who believed she had already won. Her father walked beside her, chin lifted, pride radiating from every step. The Ashbourne name carried weight, old money, political donors, influence built over generations. Heads bowed slightly as she passed. Phones lifted discreetly. This was history being documented. At the altar, Julian finally moved. His eyes lifted. He watched her walk toward him, not with awe, not with longing, but with the detached precision of someone reviewing evidence one last time. What no one saw. If anyone had been close enough to hear Julian's thoughts, they might have mistaken them for calm. They were wrong. Julian Cross had learned early in life that emotions were dangerous things. They clouded judgment. They softened instincts. They convinced people to ignore patterns that didn't fit the story they wanted to believe. Julian did not ignore patterns. He cataloged them. Lydia had been a pattern long before she became a bride. 6 years earlier, they met at a private charity gala hosted in a glass-walled penthouse overlooking the city. Lydia had been surrounded by donors, politicians, and board members, all orbiting her effortlessly. Julian noticed her because she was the only one in the room who wasn't impressed by anyone. She noticed him because he wasn't trying to be noticed. Their conversation had been polite, intelligent, measured. By the end of the night, Lydia had decided Julian would be useful. By the end of the night, Julian had decided Lydia would be dangerous. Neither of them walked away. The relationship everyone admired. To the outside world, they were perfection. Magazine features called them power couple. Friends called them unbreakable. Social media painted them in warm light, frozen smiles, curated happiness. Lydia brought Julian into elite circles, charity boards, political fundraisers, rooms where deals were made quietly over champagne. Julian brought Lydia stability, intelligence, discretion, silence. And silence, Lydia believed, meant loyalty. She never realized it also meant observation. The first crack. The first inconsistency appeared 2 years into their relationship. A late-night meeting Lydia dismissed too quickly. A transfer from a shared account that didn't align with any expense. A phone call that ended the moment Julian entered the room. Most people would have asked questions. Julian didn't. He started watching. He installed security cameras in their home under the excuse of asset protection. He logged financial records. He synced devices quietly. What he found wasn't a single betrayal. It was a network. And Lydia was at the center of it. Back to the present. Lydia reached the altar. She took Julian's hands. Her fingers were warm, steady. Julian noticed that too. The priest began speaking. Words about devotion, honesty, truth. Julian listened carefully. The irony was exquisite. Lydia recited her vows first. Her voice was emotional but controlled. The perfect balance. Julian, she said softly, hazel eyes shimmering. From the moment I met you, I knew my life had changed. You were my safe place. My partner. With you, I am finally home. A collective sigh rippled through the cathedral. Some guests wiped tears. Julian nodded politely. Then the priest turned to him. Julian, your vows. Julian did not speak. Instead, he reached for the microphone. The movement was subtle, but unmistakably wrong. Lydia laughed softly. Nervously. Julian? She whispered. He lifted the mic and said the sentence that would split the world in two. Before I say my vows, I need everyone here to watch something. The screen turns on. The first betrayal. The cathedral froze. Julian's voice echoed softly through the ancient stone, calm and measured, the tone of a man delivering facts, not emotions. Before I say my vows, I need everyone here to watch something. A murmur rippled through the pews. Lydia's smile faltered, just slightly, like a crack in glass you only noticed if you were looking for it. What? She whispered, laughing nervously. Julian, is this a joke? He didn't answer. Instead, Julian turned toward the altar rail and nodded once. At the back of the cathedral, a technician hesitated. Then the massive projection screen, hidden behind velvet drapery, descended slowly from the ceiling. Gasps echoed through the room. This was not part of the ceremony. Lydia's father stood halfway from his seat. What is this? He demanded. Julian finally looked at Lydia, and for the first time that day, his eyes were not distant. They were precise. I promised myself, Julian said into the microphone, that if I ever stood here, it would be with the truth. The lights dimmed. The screen flickered to life. The first image. At first, it looked harmless. A dimly lit hotel corridor. The timestamp glowed in the corner of the screen. 2 years ago, 11:47 p.m. A woman stepped into view. The cathedral went silent. Lydia. She wasn't wearing a gown. She wasn't wearing confidence. She was wearing a black silk dress, hair loose over her shoulders, eyes scanning the hallway before she knocked softly on a door. A man opened it. The guests leaned forward. Some recognized him immediately. Marcus Vale, Julian's best friend. The man who had been Julian's best man, until that morning. The door closed behind Lydia. The video continued. No audio, just truth. Realization. Lydia's breath caught sharply. No, she whispered. Her hand tightened around Julian's. Julian gently removed it. The screen cut to another angle. Inside the hotel room, Marcus pulled Lydia into an embrace that was not confused, not hesitant, not accidental. It was familiar, practiced, intimate. A woman in the front row let out a choked sob. Someone else stood abruptly, knocking over a program. The priest stepped back, pale. Lydia turned to Julian, panic blazing through her composure. Julian, listen to me. This isn't. He raised one finger. Please, he said calmly. Let it play. The pattern emerges. The footage jumped. Different date, different hotel. Same embrace, same intimacy. Another timestamp, another city. Marcus and Lydia laughing in an elevator mirror. Her lipstick smeared, his tie loosened. Julian narrated now, not angrily, not bitterly, but like a man reading a report. This wasn't a mistake, he said. It wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was ongoing. Planned. Repeated. Lydia shook her head violently. You don't understand. Oh, Julian said softly. I understand perfectly. The first twist. The screen cut to a new clip. This time, audio played. Marcus's voice filled the cathedral. You know he trusts me, Marcus said, laughing. That's the best part, Lydia replied. Julian only sees what he wants to see. The laughter echoed, distorted, cruel. Julian inhaled slowly. Marcus, he said, eyes still on the screen, stood beside me for 15 years. He was in my home, at my table. He toasted to our future. The camera angle shifted. Marcus kissed Lydia's neck. He'll never find out, Marcus said. He doesn't need to, Lydia replied. After the wedding, everything changes. The room erupted. Shouts, gasps, a chair scraping loudly across stone. Lydia's mother covered her mouth, tears streaming. Her father stormed toward the altar, until security quietly blocked him. Lydia's voice broke. Julian, please, this isn't what it looks like. Julian finally turned to her. What does it look like, Lydia? He asked gently. She had no answer. The second reveal. The video didn't stop. The screen went black for a brief moment. Then a title appeared. You thought this was all. A new clip played. A quiet cafe. Lydia sat across from Marcus, not in secret, not in shadows, but openly. The timestamp glowed. 6 months ago. Once we're married, Lydia said, stirring her coffee. Julian's assets merge with mine. After that, we just need time. Marcus frowned. And the prenup? Lydia smiled. A slow, deliberate smile. Already handled. The cathedral went deathly still. Julian's jaw tightened. I didn't confront her, he said quietly, because cheating wasn't the real story. The camera zoomed in on Lydia's face in the video. He trusts me, she continued. That's his weakness. The prenup that vanished. Julian turned back to the guests. 3 months ago, he said, my prenup disappeared from our shared legal files. The replacement was flawless, identical, except for one clause. He paused. It removed the protection of my private holdings. Lydia's knees buckled slightly. The screen flashed to documents. Highlighted text. Legal annotations. Proof. Julian continued, voice steady. Someone with access altered it. Someone who knew the system. Someone who knew me. The video cut again. This time, a parking garage. Marcus handed Lydia a folder. Once this is done, Marcus said, we're free. The moment everything breaks. Lydia screamed. Stop it, she cried, lunging for the screen. Security restrained her gently, firmly. This is private, she shouted. This is manipulation. He's lying. Julian watched her. The woman he once planned to grow old with. The woman who believed she had outplayed everyone. You were right about one thing, Julian said softly. I trusted you. He stepped closer. And you used that trust to try to erase me. The screen faded to black. Silence swallowed the cathedral. Then Julian spoke the words no one expected. And that, he said, was only the first betrayal. The crime beneath the love story. The silence after the screen went black was heavier than any scream. It pressed against the cathedral walls, against the stained glass, against the chests of every guest who had just watched a love story wrought in real time. Lydia stood frozen at the altar, her breath shallow, her face drained of color. Mascara traced thin black lines down her cheeks, transforming perfection into something fractured and human. Julian waited. He always waited. Then the screen flickered back on. This was never just cheating. A single sentence appeared in stark white letters against a black background. Infidelity was the distraction. A murmur spread through the room. Julian lifted the microphone again, his voice lower now, deliberate. I didn't stop investigating after I discovered the affair, he said, because the numbers didn't add up. The screen shifted to a clean, sterile office space. A desktop monitor filled the frame of spreadsheets, wire transfers, timestamp transactions scrolling faster than most people could follow. Julian continued. Over 18 months, more than $12 million was moved through shell accounts linked to foundations Lydia publicly chaired. Gasps rippled through the cathedral. Lydia shook her head violently. Those are charities, she cried. Those are donations. Julian didn't look at her. They were, he replied. Until they weren't. The foundation. The screen zoomed in on a familiar logo. The Ashbourne Children's Renewal Fund, a charity Lydia had spoken about passionately, a cause she had cried over during interviews, a foundation that bore her family's name. Julian's voice softened, not with sympathy, but with gravity. That foundation received millions in public donations, disaster relief funds, medical grants, international aid. The video cut to an internal audit report, highlighted in red. Misappropriated funds, unauthorized transfers, falsified expenditures. The priest sat heavily in a chair. Someone in the audience whispered, "Oh my God." Lydia's father's face had turned ashen. "This isn't real," Lydia said, her voice cracking. "You're twisting things." "I didn't need to," Julian replied. "You did that yourself." The third name. The screen shifted again. This time, the footage was grainier. Hidden camera footage. A private office. Lydia sat across from a man older than her, silver-haired, composed. Several guests recognized him instantly. Harold Whitcomb, a financial consultant, a board advisor, a man who had testified before Congress more than once. Julian spoke carefully now. "This," he said, "is where the story stopped being personal." The audio played. "The accounts are clean," Whitcomb said calmly. "They have to be," Lydia replied. "I can't afford attention." "You already have it," Whitcomb said. "What you're doing is laundering money through public sympathy." Lydia's eyes on the screen were cold, focused. "People donate because they want to believe," she said. "I'm just giving them a story." The cathedral erupted, shouting, protests, denials. Julian raised his voice slightly. "That recording," he said, "was made after I realized Marcus wasn't the only secret." How Julian found the truth. Julian turned away from the screen, addressing the guest directly now. "When I noticed discrepancies in my personal accounts, I hired forensic accountants," he said. "Quiet ones." The screen showed emails, encrypted messages, legal correspondence. They traced the money back to Lydia's foundations. Then beyond that, the video cut to international wire routes, offshore accounts, shell corporations. Julian's tone hardened. What Lydia didn't know, he said, was that her consultant had been flagged by federal investigators years earlier. Whitcomb's face froze on screen. A government document slid into view. Active investigation. Financial fraud. Lydia breaks. "No," Lydia whispered, shaking uncontrollably. "That's not, Julian. I was protecting us." Julian finally looked at her. "From what?" he asked. She swallowed hard. "From losing everything." The room felt smaller suddenly. Julian nodded slowly. "And that," he said, "is where you made your final mistake." The wedding was the deadline. The screen went dark again. Then a final title appeared. The wedding was the deadline. Julian's voice dropped. "I delayed reporting everything," he said, "because I needed proof, patterns, connections." He paused. "And because once we were legally married, the money trail would have been nearly impossible to untangle." Lydia's eyes widened in horror. "So you used the wedding," she said weakly. "You used me." Julian shook his head. "No," he replied. "I let you use yourself." The police arrive. The cathedral doors creaked open. Uniformed officers stepped inside. Calm, controlled, unmistakable. A hush fell over the room. An older woman in the front row fainted. The lead officer approached the altar. "Ms. Lydia Ashbourne," he said clearly, "we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of financial fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement." Lydia screamed. "This is a setup," she cried, struggling as officers took her arms. "Julian did this. He planned this." Julian stepped closer. "Yes," he said quietly. "I did." She looked at him then, really looked, and finally understood. The last thing she didn't know. As Lydia was led away, the screen flickered once more. One final message appeared, not for the guests, for her. "You never asked why I stayed." Julian lowered the microphone. "And there's still one more thing you haven't seen," he said softly. The guests leaned forward again, because somehow, they knew, the worst was still coming. The trap Lydia never saw coming. The cathedral doors closed behind Lydia with a hollow, final sound. It echoed longer than it should have. No one moved. No one spoke. The guests sat frozen in their seats, dressed for a celebration that had turned into a reckoning. The altar still gleamed with white roses. The music stand still held sheet music that would never be played. Julian stood alone at the front, composed, unmoving, as if this outcome had been inevitable all along, because to him, it was. The question no one asked. After several seconds, someone finally found their voice. A woman near the center aisle whispered, "Why?" Julian turned toward the congregation. "Because cheating doesn't explain patience," he said quietly. He gestured toward the screen. And neither does anger. The screen lit up again. Lydia wasn't on it this time. Julian was younger, thinner, standing beside another woman. The timestamp glowed. 4 years ago. A collective murmur rose. The woman before Lydia. The image sharpened. The woman beside Julian had soft features, dark curls pulled into a loose ponytail, warm brown eyes that smiled even when her mouth didn't. She stood close to him, not posed, not curated. This, Julian said, his voice tightening for the first time all day, was Alara Voss. A hush fell. She was a financial analyst, he continued. Brilliant, ethical, uncomfortable with shortcuts. The screen shifted to candid footage, Alara laughing in a kitchen, scribbling notes on a whiteboard, arguing playfully with Julian about numbers. She worked briefly with one of Lydia's foundations, Julian said, before she noticed something was wrong. Alara asked questions. The screen changed again. An email appeared. Highlighted. Julian, the books don't balance. Funds are being rerouted. If this is what I think it is, someone is in serious trouble. Julian swallowed. She told me she was going to report it. A new clip played. A parking garage. Night rain. Security footage. Alara walked alone toward her car. The video cut to black. Several guests gasped. Someone whispered, "No." Julian's voice trembled. Just barely. Alara died that night, he said. They called it an accident. The death that wasn't. Police reports appeared on the screen. Single vehicle collision. No foul play suspected. Then forensic notes, added later. Brake line damage. Evidence tampered. Julian exhaled slowly. The investigation stalled, he said. Witness statements disappeared. Evidence was misplaced. The screen showed a familiar name on internal memos. Harold Whitcomb. And another. Lydia Ashbourne. The cathedral felt like it was sinking. The long game. I didn't have proof then, Julian said. Only patterns. And grief. The screen shifted to Julian alone in a small apartment, surrounded by files. Years worth. Walls covered in notes, timelines, photographs. So I did the one thing they never expected, he continued. I stayed. The realization hit the audience like a wave. Julian hadn't been blind. He had been embedded. Why Marcus was never just a friend. The screen cut to Marcus, but not as a lover, as a liability. A recording played. You don't scare me, Marcus said smugly. You should, Julian replied calmly. Because I'm the only reason you're still useful. The date stamped the corner. 3 years ago. Julian turned back to the guests. Marcus was reckless, he said. He liked money. He liked attention. And he liked Lydia. Marcus hadn't been a betrayal. He had been leverage. The real trap. The screen now showed encrypted messages between Julian and federal investigators. Names redacted. Timelines highlighted. This case was too big to rush, Julian said. Too many powerful people. Too much money. He paused. So we needed them all connected, documented, legally bound. The word married hovered unspoken. The wedding, Julian said softly, was the last move. Lydia's final error. The screen played one last clip of Lydia, days before the ceremony. She laughed. Once we're married, she said, he's untouchable. And so am I. Julian closed his eyes briefly. She thought marriage protected her, he said. She never considered it could expose her. The room understands. The guests didn't look shocked anymore. They looked afraid, because they finally understood something chilling. Julian hadn't snapped. He hadn't reacted. He had finished. The final video remains. Julian stepped away from the altar. There is one more video, he said. This one wasn't meant for the public. He looked toward the doors Lydia had been taken through. But she wanted an audience. The screen stayed dark. For that, Julian said, you'll have to decide if you want to stay. No one moved. No one dared. Because they knew now. This wedding wasn't over. It was reaching its end. The final video and the aftermath. Dark ending. No one left the cathedral. Not after everything they had already seen. The doors remained closed. The air felt heavier now, not with shock, but with anticipation. The kind that made people afraid of what they wanted to know next. Julian stood beside the altar, no longer framed as a groom, no longer part of the ceremony. He was something else now. A witness. An architect. A man standing at the end of a long, deliberate road. The final video begins. Julian looked toward the technician once more. The man hesitated. Julian nodded. The screen lit up. This time, there was no timestamp. No location. Just Lydia. She sat alone in a dimly lit room, wearing a simple gray blouse, her hair pulled back tightly. Her face was bare. No makeup, no armor. She looked tired, and for the first time, afraid. Julian's voice echoed softly through the cathedral. This video was recorded 2 weeks ago, he said, after Lydia realized the investigation was closing in. The video played. Lydia's confession. Lydia looked directly into the camera. If you're watching this, she said quietly, then something has gone wrong. A bitter smile crossed her lips. Julian always said patterns mattered. I suppose this is his final pattern. A murmur moved through the crowd. Julian didn't blink. On screen, Lydia inhaled shakily. I didn't plan to kill her. Gasps exploded through the cathedral. Alara was a complication, Lydia continued. She asked questions. Dangerous ones. The room felt like it was tilting. Whitcomb handled it. He said it would look like an accident. I told myself that meant I wasn't responsible. Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. That's the lie I lived with. The moment of truth. The video cut briefly, then resumed. Lydia's voice cracked now. I love Julian in my own way, she said. But love doesn't survive fear, and I was afraid of losing everything. She leaned closer to the camera. If this video is public, then Julian won. A pause. And I deserve what comes next. The screen went black. The cathedral was no longer silent. It was hollow. The aftermath begins. Police officers moved again, this time with urgency. A senior detective approached Julian. "We have grounds to reopen the homicide investigation," she said quietly. "This changes everything." Julian nodded. "I know," he replied. Outside, news vans had already begun to gather. Phones buzzed. Headlines were being written in real time. Socialite arrested in wedding scandal, charity fraud hides deadly secret, groom exposes murder at his own wedding. The fairy tale was dead, and so was the myth of Lydia Ashbourne. The courtroom. Months later. Lydia stood behind glass. No makeup, no silk, just an orange uniform and hollow eyes. The courtroom was packed. Julian sat in the back row, silent, watching. The judge's voice echoed, on charges of conspiracy, financial fraud, obstruction of justice, and second-degree murder. Lydia closed her eyes. "We find the defendant guilty." She collapsed into her chair. The sentence would keep her locked away for decades. But Julian didn't feel relief, only weight. After the trial, Julian stood alone at Alara's grave. Wind rustled through the trees. He placed a single white rose on the stone. "I kept my promise," he said quietly. Then he turned away, and walked into a future that would never be clean, only honest. The cathedral was eventually restored, the roses removed, the aisle cleaned, but some people swear that if you stand there long enough, you can still feel it. The moment love died, and truth took its place. If this story shocked you, if it made you question trust, love, and the masks people wear, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel, because the next story might be even darker.